Hello students, this will be a short video explaining the reading response essay that is due in your class. This is from the Writing Today book, chapter 7. We're going to start on page 122. So if you have your textbook, it'd be good to take it out so you can take notes. Any questions you have about this presentation, you will need to contact your instructor. Okay, a reading response is very different than a reading analysis. You will notice that chapter 7 in the Writing Today book is very focused on the analysis. The reading response section, however, is only 3 pages long. So you can see the distinction between a response and analysis. A response is much shorter, does not require as much interpretive type of writing. It is a response. It is a reaction. Also, a reading response does not require outside research. The only source that you should have in your reading response is the literary work itself. You should refrain from looking on the internet or finding how other people look at your piece of literature. That will color your response, and that will actually affect and change your response and might even cause plagiarism. A reading response is supposed to be how you see the literary work. This means there really is no right or wrong answer. As long as you justify and support your opinions with quotations and examples and details from the literary work and your experiences, then your answer is fine. Do not feel the need to go and research how other people see your literary work as you write a reading response. Reading responses are very common in American literature classes, British literature classes. So mastering this genre, this microgenre, is very important for success in your future literature classes. The textbook gives us 4 main guidelines to follow when we are given a reading response, and I've marked them here in 4 different colored arrows. So let's make sure we understand what these 4 things are talking about. First, whenever you get a prompt, which is the topic that your professor is asking for you to write about, it says that you need to read the prompt very carefully. And that's because there are verbs listed in the prompt that your professor wants you to accomplish. They're actions that your professor wants you to do, but they mean different things. They give you a list of verbs here. I've underlined them in red. All of these verbs mean different things. So if you get a prompt that asks you to identify three instances of symbolism in the short story and explain what those symbols mean, you should not write a summary, okay? Because that's a completely different verb. You will lose points because you're not following directions. So whenever you get a prompt, no matter what class you're in, make sure you read it very carefully and pay attention to the verbs. Next, try out new ideas. As it is a reading response, it's your own response, which means you have the freedom to be creative and, try out some things that might be a little bit risky. But as a response, it's perfectly fine. Okay? Remember what I said, there's no right or wrong answer. Literature is full of a lot of gray area. Okay? And the way that you respond to a piece of literature is going to be different than the way somebody else responds because your life experiences colors the way you respond. Third, it says show that you have read, understood, and can work with the material. You cannot respond to something that you don't know. When responding to literature, you have to be very familiar with that piece of literature. You need to know it like the back of your hand. You need to be able to incorporate quotes, summaries, examples, descriptions, which means you need to know it, which means you need to have read it more than twice. More than twice. Okay? Now, as a side note here in the blue bubble, I've put the chapters related to punctuation and citation rules for poetry and short stories out of your PSM manual. When you quote or summarize from a short story or a poem, you need to cite it, always. So make sure that you understand MLA citation guidelines. Finally, the 4th item here is that we need to branch out and make connections. Look for broader implications, historical connections, social connections that would bring more clarity and understanding to your response. So whenever we get a response, we need to do these 4 things. Let's look at what the example gives us, the book gives us next. The next page in your textbook, you see a poem and a prompt. So we have a poem by Paul Laurence Dunbar. The poem was written in 1896. And I'm going to go ahead and read it to you really quickly. We wear the mask. We wear the mask that grins and lies. It hides our cheeks and shades our eyes. This debt we pay to human guile. With torn and bleeding hearts we smile, and mouth with myriad subtleties. Why should the world be overwise in counting all our tears and sighs? Nay, let them only see us while we wear the mask. We smile, but O great Christ, our cries to thee from tortured souls arise. We sing, but oh, the clay is vile beneath our feet and long the mile. But let the world dream otherwise. We wear the mask. Now, if we were having to write a real response to this poem, we would need to sit with it, process it, respond to it, annotate it, chew on it for a long while. I made some minor annotations on the right-hand side in blue and pink and purple. These are just initial annotations and comments and ideas. So some quotes that I found interesting in this poem were bleeding hearts, mouth subtleties, tears and sighs. These words show such vulnerability and sadness and desolation. Whenever I or others feel this way, feel this vulnerable, this sad, I agree. No, I would not want anyone to see me that way. I would also don a mask, put on a mask, and show the world a different view. I would not reveal my vulnerabilities so easily to the outside world. Another section that I found interesting was the "O Christ, O great Christ, our cries." And I underlined here in purple CHRI, CRI. This is a repetition of sound, and actually the sound is cry. And so it's very interesting. This writer does not do this anywhere else in the poem. This type of repetition, but the one time that he does, it sounds like crying. I found that very interesting. The final thing that I annotated here was about the word dream. Let the world dream otherwise. Dreams are normally perceived as positive images or hopes, but in this poem, what he's saying here, I think, is that what others think or believe about us when we put on this mask to protect our vulnerability, what they would bank on as truth is merely a dream that we give them. It's a falsehood. The truth, the reality, is what's going on behind the mask. We hide the truth and we show them, we give them a dream. Very powerful poem. Okay, let's look at the prompt. This is what the professor wants the student to write about for this poem. It says, write a response paper that is at least 400 words long and that incorporates at least 2 quotations from the poem. Not 1, 2. So following directions is extremely important. We need at least 2 quotes. Paul Laurence Dunbar's poem renders a general social issue, concrete and tangible, with his critical metaphor of the mask. Now, this sentence is a little bit confusing, so let's break it down. Renders means to create or to make. So he's saying here that this poem makes a general social issue concrete and tangible. Social issues are things like poverty, racism. Those things are very vague and abstract, very difficult to delineate, and definitely not concrete or tangible. So the professor here is saying that this poem renders or makes this social issue that's discussed in the poem, makes it concrete for us, makes it tangible for us, because he's connecting it to the metaphor of a mask. And the mask is something that we can understand. I can wrap my brain around that. I can touch that. I can understand that. Okay, so that's the premise of this prompt. Then we start to see the verbs. I've highlighted the verbs here in dark red. The first thing we have to do, the students have to do in this essay, is examine the metaphor closely. Examine means to look at, find it, see where it is, and what is it doing. The next action is to explain. Now this word explain here actually has 2 points. You see that there's the conjunction and. So there are two points that the students have to explain. 1, explain how it works in the poem. That's the first step. And 2, explain how it adds to the impact or meaning of the poem in terms of tone, theme, or overall message. Okay, the second explanation that the students have to give is actually 3 options. They have to explain how the metaphor impacts either tone or theme or overall message. If a student's not reading the prompt carefully, some students will actually talk about all 3. How the metaphor affects tone and theme and message. They will lose points because they're not following directions, even though they're doing more than what's required. So this student has to explain how the metaphor is working, and then secondly, explain how it is impacting tone or theme or message. The last step of the essay is to speculate. It says, finally, speculate about whether you believe the metaphor is still appropriate in today's world, even though the poem was written over 100 years ago. Speculations are guesses or inferences. So this is something that the student believes based on their own experiences. And you notice that the question says, the prompt says, speculate about whether you believe. When a prompt mentions you, then you are allowed to use I in the essay. And that makes perfect sense. This is a response. This is a personal response. So it makes perfect sense that you would have I in the essay. The last page shown here is the sample essay. Now the book does a good job. You see on the left, you see some orange arrows telling you different sections and explaining what's going on. I've added some extra points. The red bubbles are pointing out the fact that MLA is missing in this sample essay. You are required to have citations and a works cited page. So just because this sample does not mean that you are forgiven that. You must have MLA in your paper. I've also marked green, orange, and purple sections because I'm showing you the sections where the student is following the verbs in the prompt. The green section is where he examines, the orange section is where it's explained, and the final purple section is where it's speculated. So this is a very key point. Following the sequence of the verbs in the prompt gives you the outline of your essay. So it's extremely important to understand and follow the verbs. Okay, so this is a sample of what a reading response looks like.